President Trump says talks with Iran are not over, even though a marathon session in Pakistan this weekend failed to produce any movement toward the end to the war. Right now, a U.S. naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is underway.
The Strait of Hormuz is at the center of a high-stake battle of blockades. Now, for more than a month, Iran restricted traffic through this waterway, right? This week, the US imposed a blockade targeting Iranian maritime traffic.
The Strait of Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, but through this single corridor, nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply moves every day, and carried by hundreds of massive commercial tankers that have no real alternative route. To keep that flow stable, vessels are required to follow tightly defined shipping lanes and naval forces operating in the region. Among them are U.S. Navy destroyers, which communicate and respond to any movement that appears outside standard maritime patterns. But in a space this narrow, even a small shift in naval presence changes the equation, because here, control isn't about blocking the water. It's about controlling the conditions under which movement is allowed to continue. What does it actually mean when a warship decides who gets to pass and who doesn't? Right now, in one of the most strategically sensitive waterways on the planet, U.S. Navy destroyers are operating in a way that goes far beyond simple patrol. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow corridor connecting the Persian Gulf to the open ocean, carries a massive portion of the world's oil supply every single day. At its tightest point, it is only about 21 miles wide, forcing some of the largest vessels on Earth into confined, predictable paths. And now, those paths are no longer just commercial routes. They are being watched, monitored, and in some cases, controlled. What makes this situation different is not just the presence of U.S. warships, but the role they are now positioned to play. Recent developments indicate that U.S. naval forces are actively enforcing restrictions on vessels attempting to access Iranian ports. This is not a random or symbolic move. It is structured and backed by some of the most advanced warships ever built. Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are among the most advanced surface combat vessels in the world. With powerful radar systems and integrated communication networks, they can monitor movement across a vast area of the ocean. And in a place where every ship must follow a narrow path, influence quickly turns into control. From a distance, the operation appears measured and controlled. Radar systems sweep the horizon, helicopters move overhead, and commercial traffic continues to flow. But beneath that surface, a subtle shift is taking place. Ships approaching certain routes are no longer operating with complete freedom. Instead, they are entering a monitored environment where their movements can be questioned. This effectively transforms what was once an open commercial passage into a tightly regulated choke point, where military authority can override civilian movement at any moment. What actually happens when a ship decides not to comply? The most effective way to control the sea is to make sure no one tests you in the first place. It starts with something simple: voice over the radio. When a vessel approaches a sensitive zone, U.S. Navy ships issue clear instructions over international maritime channels, requesting identification. On paper, it sounds procedural, but in reality, that message carries weight because it is backed by a warship that has already tracked your position and is prepared for what happens next.
Rating system, radar system, periscopes, strategic navigation system, all the systems that tell us where we are in the water, we're responsible for.
I'm a ETR. We do communications on and off the boat.
The electronics radio rate, they're in charge of receiving message.
Most ships comply immediately, and that's the point. But what if one doesn't? At that moment, the situation doesn't escalate dramatically. It tightens. Surveillance locks in, and the ship is no longer just another contact on radar. It becomes the focus. Its speed, heading, and behavior are monitored continuously. Helicopters lift off not just to observe, but to be seen. Every move the vessel makes is now part of a larger picture. And here's the part most people don't think about. The destroyer doesn't need to block the ship physically. It only needs to make one thing clear: that continuing forward is no longer a neutral decision. That's when pressure replaces distance. If the vessel still doesn't comply, the next step becomes physical. Fast boats are launched. Boarding teams move in, trained to secure, inspect, and take control if necessary. The process is precise and designed to avoid chaos. But make no mistake, by this point, control has already been established. Because the reality is, the ship didn't stop when the boats arrived. It stopped the moment it realized it was being controlled. And that's how a destroyer enforces restrictions without firing a shot, answering how control can exist without immediately triggering conflict. Control in the Strait of Hormuz is never one-sided, because every move is being watched. Iran has spent decades preparing for exactly this kind of scenario. Unlike large blue water navies that rely on massive ships and global reach, Iran's naval strategy in this region is built around asymmetry. Speed, numbers, and geography are its advantages. The country operates a large fleet of fast attack craft, small vessels capable of moving quickly through the narrow waters of the strait. These boats are not designed to match destroyers in a conventional fight. They are designed to complicate the battlefield.
Looked like fishing vessels on radar. At 12 miles, the pattern became clear. This wasn't commerce. This was a coordinated swarm attack straight out of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard playbook.
Alongside these vessels, Iran has invested heavily in coastal defense systems. Anti-ship missiles positioned along the coastline can cover significant portions of the strait, and creating zones where large ships must operate with caution. Drones provide additional surveillance, allowing movements of foreign naval forces to be tracked in real time. And beneath the surface, the threat becomes even harder to detect. Naval mines remain one of the most effective tools in this environment. They are relatively inexpensive and capable of causing significant damage to even the most advanced warships. Some float just below the surface, tethered to the seabed. Others sit silently on the ocean floor, waiting to detect changes in pressure or magnetic fields. In a narrow waterway, even a small number of mines can disrupt traffic on a massive scale. This means that every U.S. destroyer operating in the region is doing so under constant observation, in an environment where multiple layers of potential threat exist at the same time. Fast boats on the surface, missiles on the coast, mines below the water, and drones above, watching everything. So what happens when that pressure stops being theoretical and turns into a real test in the middle of the water? Most confrontations at sea do not begin with weapons. They begin with hesitation. Imagine a commercial tanker approaching the state, following its assigned route, when it receives a warning to alter course. The message is clear, but the situation is not. The crew knows the importance of their cargo, and for a moment they hesitate. That hesitation is where everything changes. The destroyer monitoring the vessel increases its level of response. Communication becomes more direct. A helicopter circles overhead. Its presence is no longer just observational, but assertive. At this point, the situation moves from control to confrontation. Fast boats may be launched to intercept. Boarding teams prepare for possible engagement. The destroyer positions itself more directly, creating a physical barrier that cannot be ignored. Every movement is calculated. Now introduce another variable. An unidentified fast-moving craft appears on radar, approaching the area at high speed. It could be civilian or military, but in an environment like this, uncertainty is itself a threat. The destroyer now has to track multiple targets and remain aware of potential threats from the coastline. This is no longer a simple interaction. It is a layered, dynamic situation where decisions have to be made in seconds. In scenarios like this, escalation does not come from a single decision. It comes from a chain of small, perfectly reasonable actions that together create something much larger. And once that chain starts moving, it becomes very difficult to stop. And that's how control turns into confrontation. Not through a single aggressive move, but through a chain of small decisions that slowly remove the space for anything else. What happens in a narrow stretch of water can echo across the entire world. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a regional concern, it is a global artery. A significant portion of the world's oil passes through this corridor every day. When traffic through the strait is disrupted, even slightly, the effects are felt almost immediately. Oil prices begin to fluctuate. Markets react not just to what is happening, but to what might happen next. Governments begin to assess their energy reserves. All of this can be triggered by a situation that on the surface involves only a handful of ships in a relatively small area. Now consider the role of enforcement. When U.S. Navy destroyers restrict access to Iranian ports, they are not just influencing a single country. They are affecting the flow of goods, energy, and commerce on a global scale. Every decision made in that environment carries weight far beyond the immediate moment. And the most critical factor is uncertainty. Because markets, governments, and military forces are not just reacting to actions, they are reacting to possibilities. The possibility of escalation and conflict. Because in reality, you don't have to shut down the Strait of Hormuz to disrupt the global economy. You only have to make the world think it might shut down. And once that uncertainty takes hold, the effects begin spreading instantly. It is shaping a situation where the line between control and confrontation is always present, always shifting, and never entirely stable. Because in a place like the Strait of Hormuz, it doesn't take much. Just a single moment of miscalculation, a ship that doesn't turn. And when that happens, the question is no longer who controls access to a port. It becomes something much bigger. Who controls what happens next? Control in the Strait of Hormuz isn't defined by force. It's defined by presence, timing, and the ability to shape decisions without ever firing a shot. It's a system where movement is monitored, and even the smallest action can shift the balance. Because in a place this narrow, with stakes this high, control is never guaranteed. It's maintained, moment to moment. And when that balance slips, it doesn't take long for a controlled situation to become something far more difficult to contain.